very excited about our next guest. I'm going to bring her in. Her name is Sophia Nelson, best-selling author, political analyst. You've seen her on CNN, MS Now, C-SPAN. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And she has a new book called Redefining Freedom: Thoughts of Bridging Divides and Renewing the American Promise at 250. Sophia, how are you?
I'm great, Janet. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, I'm honored to be here. I'm glad to start with Virginia media first.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so you've written this book, and Redefining Freedom. That catches your attention immediately, and we have a shot here on the screen of your book. Um, how do we see freedom, and have we been thinking about freedom in the wrong way?
Well, I think it's important for context for your viewers. We're talking about this because in July, America turns 250 years old. And I thought it was important at this juncture to do a pause and to stop and say, okay, I'm glad we're going to have celebrations. I'm glad we're going to have commemorations. But it's also a time of reflection on where our democracy is right now. And I think whether you are Republican, Democrat, or Independent, we can all agree that we have a civic break, a civic divide, that we are a deeply divided country on even things as simple, Janet, as what the truth is and what color the sky is right now. We can't agree on the most basic things. This democracy is fragile right now in our 250th year. And so as we think about freedom, I think that we either are going to go forward with an expansive view, a view that we become a more perfect union, or we're going to regress and go backwards, as it appears there are some in our country who very much want to go backwards. So I think the core premise of the book, Janet, is democracy does not sustain itself. It requires civic engagement, the American people to get involved, to be civically minded, to
Mm-hmm.
vote, and we've not done a good job of that lately.
Yeah, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It has gotten so ugly. What do you find is like the biggest discrepancy between the American promise of 1776 and the American reality of 2026?
You know, that's an important question. It's really important, though, that one of the reasons, I know here in Virginia, for example, over the last election cycle, I'm talking about the 2020 and 2021 cycle when Governor Youngkin won, there
Mm-hmm.
was a real divide here in the Commonwealth about whether we teach history, whether we're allowed to talk about it, whether we keep up things like Confederate monuments, or we go forward differently. And I think that the real divide in this country about where we were in 1776 versus where we are now is that in 1776, the founders understood that they did not want to be under a tyrannical king, period. And if I had Thomas Jefferson on this podcast with us and John Adams
That would be
and
great.
Ben Franklin, it would be great, right? But if I had and Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams here, and they were writing the Declaration of Independence, they would say, Sophia, we know slavery's wrong. We know we should get rid of it. But if we do, the South isn't going to come along with us. So we're going to make an awful compromise, and we're going to have this institution go on well into the 1860s until Lincoln becomes president. And then what happens is the country pivots and it goes forward in a better direction. And what I'm saying is the promise of 1776, and we should keep this in front of us always, long after you and I are gone,
Mm-hmm.
is that we become a more perfect union, that we right the wrongs, that we do better, that we become more inclusive, not less inclusive, that we become a greater nation, not a lesser one, that we become a better partner in NATO and in Europe and across the globe, not one that shrinks back and becomes an isolationist. So I think that promise is still there, and I'm saying time to renew it, time to, as Jefferson said, refresh that tree of liberty and to go forward better, more knowledgeable, wiser, as a group of citizens who actually, we don't always have to get along, Janet. We don't always have to agree.
Right.
That's not
Mm-hmm.
America. but we can be civil and decent to one another, and we don't have to destroy one another, and we don't have to be hateful to one another. And that's my biggest worry right now, because a democracy, particularly a democratic republic, cannot sustain itself if there isn't civic engagement by the citizenry, and if the citizenry is deeply divided and at one another in tribes. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's what we see so much on social media, and we can talk about that. But also this, concept of people believing that their freedom is being taken away as they are seeing others gain more freedom. How did that come about?
Again, that's tribalism, right? And that's not
Mm-hmm.
America. I mean, although, again, I'll go back to the beginning, because I think how we start something is usually how we finish it or how we end up with it. And I think America has done a really good job at reinventing herself over and over. And this notion of freedom that Jefferson writes about in the Declaration, he says they're God-given rights that come not from man and not from government, but from God. Freedom, the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to pursue happiness, right? Those things come from God. They're inalienable. But the reality is that if I see freedom only as what's good for Sophia, and you see it as only what's good for Janet, that means that we leave out our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues, our communities, and that's not freedom. Freedom in America, the reason it has thrived for 250 years is because it's collective, because it is about we the people. It is about what is best for the greatest number of us. That doesn't mean that we leave out the least among us. Jesus would argue with that one. And as a Christian, I think there's an ethos there that really was built into our framing. Not that it was a Christian framing, but that it was a framing of a moral and virtuous government, as John Adams said, that would uh, value freedom for me, freedom for you, freedom for all of us, and that the Bill of Rights is what you really have to go to, right, Janet? You go to
Mm-hmm.
those 10 amendments, the first Bill of Rights, and the first 10 amendments, rather, and you look at them, and the first one is what? Freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is the right to keep and bear arms. And you can go down and see that they're individual liberties, but they're also for everyone to share in.
Yeah. And when you talk about some of the ugliness that we're seeing today, here's where I worry. I worry about this younger generation that's growing up and thinking that this is normal, that this is the way we're supposed to be. And as someone who's been around for a while, I'm always
Me too.
talking to my kids and just young people in general and saying, I can remember when we were all on the same page, where a fact was a fact, where we weren't making up things, or where you would be too embarrassed to, you valued your integrity.
Mhm.
How do you, because I did see where you are devoting the book to the younger generation. Tell me more
Yes.
about that.
Well, listen, this is their country. You and I are Gen Xers, and fastly moving into our senior years here in the next decade, and that scares me to think
Oh,
of
don't
that.
remind me.
But that's real. And one of the things I'd like to see, and I talk about this a lot in the book, this book is a very forward looking, it is a pathway forward. It's not a lamentation of everything that's broken. It is a spotlight on these are the things that aren't working. These are the guardrails that have fallen, and we need to put the wheels back on and we need to move forward. So I'm calling on the younger generation to get involved, to run for office, to vote, to organize, and many of them do. But they've got to want this. They've got to want a country, Janet, where the President of the United States, members of Congress, senators, governors, when they speak with civility and decency and accountability. Presidents don't call female reporters piggies. Presidents don't demean reporters and call them stupid and dumb and throw them out the Oval Office when they ask a question out. Like, no president has ever done that. Not even Richard Nixon at his lowest moments did that. He had the decency to resign, or his party was going to remove him. And my point is that we've gotten into a place now, because of our phones, because of our very short attention spans. Janet, you have kids, you know this is true. Block, delete, ignore, ghost. That's the language of their generation. They even cut family members off now. We are going to find ourselves in a very difficult crisis as a country if the next generation of leadership resolves foreign policy conflict or domestic policy conflict with arguments, threats, and violence and menacing talk. That's not the way you do this. And we see that increasingly. We have isolated ourselves from the rest of the world. Our allies no longer like us at all and are very vocal about it. Canada just went off today about that and decided that they're not going to trade anymore with American businesses. That is massively huge when you think about the relationship we've enjoyed with Canada up to this point. And so what I'm saying is this social media culture we live in, Janet, this phone culture that we know from every study on mental health is not good for our kids, is also not good for us. And so I'm trying to call on the next generation to adapt that, yes, you do have phones, you do have technology. That's okay. But don't let that be the heartbeat of your life. Don't deal with people like they're on the other end of a device. Deal with people in their humanity and treat them accordingly the way you want to be treated. I think we need to get back to some good old-fashioned basic civics, manners, respect, decency, and conversation, not texting and actually talking to one another.
Yeah, and there are so many studies out there that say that when people get away from social media, their mental health improves. That, Instagram, people feeling more depressed when they're comparing themselves to what they're seeing in these pictures. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So, I wish there was a way we could do like a social media purge.
I would tell everybody, direct everybody to a Georgetown University study that just dropped literally last week. They paid people over a period of 3 months to stay off of social media. And the results were astounding, Janet. Just in 2 weeks, not 2 months, not 2 years, people's mental health got better. They slept better. They weren't agitated. There was less ADHD if they had it. What does that tell you about the beautiful way we were built as humans, that we need connection? President Bush was on the Today Show the other day talking. Jenna had all the presidents, the living presidents, on to talk about the 250th. And President Bush talked about his and Michelle Obama's special relationship and how much they love each other and passing each other candy. And he couldn't believe how it went viral. He didn't even know what that was. And he said, his grandkids are telling him, you went viral, Pop. And he's like, I did what? He's like, because I handed her a piece of candy. He said, people are starved for just that kind of decency between a white Republican conservative man and a more liberal African American woman. He's like, and we are friends and we do like each other. We don't have to agree, but we can be kind to one another. And so I think we need to see more of that. And I think when we do, I think our civic discourse will get better. I think you will find that people will want to run for office again, Janet. They will want to get involved without being afraid of the destructive cost of being in public office.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on why this American promise that we strive for cannot be achieved by policy and law alone. It's going to take a lot more than that.
I fully agree. It's we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Think of the way they opened the Constitution. They didn't say we, the government. They didn't say we, the social media devices. They said we, the people. And they understood that it was going to take people to right the wrongs of how this country started. This country started in an amazing way, but it started half slave. And that remnant of that is still with us. To avoid it, to not talk about it, to not deal with the effects of it is wrong. And so I think the more we can talk, the more we can be open, the more we can share, whether you're conservative or liberal or in the middle, we have to learn to respect each other's point of view again without destroying one another. It's very distressing, and we've seen this just recently, and I'll bring this up with the horrible death of former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, and him taking his wife's life. That was a long. I want to say this carefully. Justin was not in a good place for a really long time, and he simmered. He was stuck. He felt ill-treated in the public square, and he never turned that corner, Janet. And Although at the end of the day, his choices were his own, and he made horrible choices at the very end, horrible.
Yeah.
My heart breaks for the kids and for both families, but most of all for Dr. Serena Fairfax, whose life was taken
She's a
from
beautiful
her.
person. Mm-hmm.
Yes, in an act of horrific domestic violence, something I never would have thought Justin was capable of. But I bring him up to underscore my point that in the public square, when we set out to do opposition research on our fellow opponents, when we decide we're going to dig up something in somebody's life, whether it was 30 years ago or 3 weeks ago, and then we're going to wait to drop it, and then we're going to not think about the cost to not just that person and other people, but to their children and their spouses. And it's a calculated move where we literally hire private detectives. This is true, by the way, what I'm telling you. It's called opposition research. And we
Yeah.
dig up as much dirt as we can on people, and then we release it strategically to destroy them so that our guy can win. That's a broken system. That is not a healthy system. That is not the way this should be. Yes, I'm accountable. If I put my name on a ballot, I am accountable for, I'm putting myself out there and saying I'm a good person. I'm somebody that I think you can trust to do good things. But that doesn't mean I'm not a human being that's flawed. It doesn't mean that if I've been in a 30-year marriage, that what if I had a lapse in my marriage one time and then my spouse forgave me and we've been happy for 25 years? Do you have a right to know that I had a lapse in year two and use that to destroy me and my family when we're
Mm-hmm.
good? I don't think
Right.
that's
Right.
right. And I think
Yeah.
we need to think about that. And we need to think about wanting good people to run for office and wanting flawed
Mm-hmm.
people to run for office because we are all flawed.
We are all
And I just,
flawed.
yeah, and I
And
watched this thing, and again, I want to be unequivocal in my language. What Justin did was horrific. It was vile. Um, I'm still very emotional about it because, as you know, I spoke to him the week that this happened, a couple days before. And where I'm mortified is, though, is that there were better choices to make. But I also know that I spoke to this man pretty much every week for the last number of years, me and others trying to encourage. And he was just destroyed by this. And one of the last things he said to me before he took his own life and that of his wife was that he was owed an apology. He wanted his life back. People had destroyed him. And he never got over that. And that is not something I ever want to see happen to anybody in public life again,
mm-hmm.
whether they're my opponent or not, or on the other side. That's just not how we should treat people. If somebody has something bad in their past, Janet, the better thing to do is that the political parties need to vet those candidates before they put their name on
Before
the
then.
ballot,
Yeah.
right? And so if you've got something out there that's bad, we're going to tell you, you probably shouldn't run for this office because you've
Yeah.
got this thing hanging out and it will come out. And that's a better way to do this, where we kind of pre-vet in the political parties or in the primaries
Mm-hmm.
versus this awful thing that we do to people. And we destroy families, not just the politician. You destroy wives and children and husbands and children. And it's
Yeah.
not okay.
And we should mention what you're speaking of, or those were the allegations in 2019 where he was accused of sexual assault by two different women and went through great lengths trying to clear his name,
Yes.
and just felt like his political career ended at that point. And that's what you mean when you say he never recovered from that.
Yeah, and absolutely. And also, I think for context, and anybody can hit Google, I'm a big believer in, I'm a believe the women. I do. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think women make these things up. Sometimes that happens, but that is not the norm. But I think what we have to do is offer some form of due process in our civic life, in the public square. Because now, Janet, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist. You've had training, I've had training. We've been doing this a long time. Anybody now with a phone can call themselves a journalist and break news. And so the problem is, once it's out there, once the allegations about anything are out there, you now are on the defense and you don't have a way of due process in order to clear your name or
Mm-hmm.
not. You're now stuck with the allegations. And then what happens, Janet, and this certainly happened in Justin's case, no firm is going to hire even a Duke educated and a Columbia law educated guy when he's been accused of sexual assault by two women, even if it was 20 years ago. Because now that firm has to deal with, the women in my firm are going to start screaming at me like, are you nuts? People are going to quit. There's going to be a revolt. Then I have to worry about, if I bring this person into the workplace and this is who they are, am I putting other women at risk, right? So
Right. Yeah.
once the allegation is out there, you're finished. And
Mm-hmm.
I just think that we've got to do better than that in America and in our civic life. And we really need to stop at this 250th and do more than just have parades and parties and hot dogs. And I plan to do all that too, like you do.
Right.
But I want to stop and think about the state of my country and
Think
what I can
about,
do to
yeah.
help make it better before I leave this earth. And that's why I wanted to dedicate this to the young people. And I'm going to get with them on the college campuses. I'm going to talk all around the country about this because I want them to win. I want them to make this country better and greater long after you and I no longer walk this earth. And you've got great great grandchildren running around, and I've got great great nieces and nephews running around. That's my hope.
Okay. And on that note, Sophia, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I just have a couple of more questions.
Sure.
All right. Thanks.
If a donation makes sense for you right now, I'm asking you to pitch in to the Democratic Party's Fight Fund. Let me explain. This is how Democrats win. We win when we fight for working people, when we stand up to the president's hate and extremism, when we champion bold ideas, even when billionaires try to stop them. We win when grassroots supporters understand the power in their hands and take action. So I'm asking you to pitch in to the DNC's Fight Fund, because the only way to make government work for working people is by building the resources we need to defeat MAGA in election after election.
All right, welcome back to Live Impact News. We are having a great discussion with best-selling author Sophia Nelson. She is here talking about her new book, Redefining Freedom, Thoughts of Bridging Divides and Renewing the American Promise at 250. So, Sophia, when you speak about bridging divides, is there a point where the divide is too wide?
You know, I'm an eternal optimist, so I say no. I think this country has seen worse days, believe it or not, than what we see now. The Civil War was the real test of America, and if we can get through that period where we literally started shooting at one another, and 13 of the states broke off in the South, and then Texas out into the West. I mean, if we can come through that, thank God for the leadership of Abraham Lincoln and a strong Congress and a strong cabinet, but also amazing generals and the men who sacrificed for the Union, including colored regiments at the time of former and freed slaves. So if this country can overcome that, I am optimistic that we can overcome anything. But again, Janet, it goes back to teaching our history and not shying away from the bad parts. Just like we all human beings have flaws and issues, your partner doesn't shy away from your bad parts, because if they do, the marriage won't last, the relationship won't last, the family won't stay together. Well, that's the same thing for a country. A country has to be able to look at its blemishes and its problems and the ugly parts, and yet take the best of us and be able to mend those two together and merge them and go forward. And that's what this next generation is going to have to do, because we have serious problems. We have public health problems. We have a housing gap where young people can't afford a home the way we could when we got out of school and graduate school and law school and could buy a townhouse or a condo or a home. Young people are burdened with debt, student loan debt that's not just 25,000 or so. You're talking a couple $100,000, and then they can't find a job. And I can go on and on and on about the gap of wealth, right, between the baby boomers, our parents, and us, Gen X, and then the millennials, Y and Z. And that gap gets wider. Not to mention the nation is carrying more debt in the trillions than it's ever had before. So, their future is going to be a difficult one. They're going to have to make some hard choices. And we know that the gap between wealthy and the working class, now working poor, because there are people that have two jobs, Janet, and they can't make ends meet. They can barely put
Right.
food on the table. And so that gap continues to widen, and that means more social safety programs are going to have to be implemented by the government. And you see what I mean? There's this
Yeah.
tension, like what's too far, what's not enough.
Right.
The generation that comes after us, we have done a terrible thing to them, and left them. And it's not Gen X, because the truth is, and let me just go on my rant here for a moment about the baby boomers. They don't want to leave office. They're dying in office. Another congressman died the other day in office instead of retiring at 80 years old. And, you've got a generation of politicians in the Senate and the House that have been there 20, 30 plus years, and they won't leave. And so you have people making decisions, Janet, about a 21st century world who literally came into office, some of them in the 70s, 60s, and 70s plus. So I think that we need term limits. I think we're going to have to take a hard look at how we freshen leadership up and how we have younger people whose future is at stake making decisions versus a bunch of old people who've
Right.
already lived their lives making decisions for people that they won't even be around to see
Right.
get to their age. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And it kind of goes into, my next question. I mean, you think about, so much of this is about individual responsibility. And when you want to redefine freedom, you have to make sure that you include all the voices and the voices of those who have been historically left behind. And that becomes the challenge. How do you make sure that those who feel alienated feel included?
Well, there it is. I was very intentional about redefining freedom. I could have chose a lot of different words. I almost went with reconstructing freedom, but I landed on redefining because I don't want to reconstruct it as much as I just want to shift it a little bit to be inclusive in a 21st century world. I don't want to throw away the Constitution or the Declaration. I love both of them. It hangs right behind us on the wall here. And I can say them both almost from memory, and how scary is that? But the point is that I want to take the best parts of who we are and understand that the Constitution is an 18th century document, folks. I said 18th century. We live in a 21st century world. And so you've got to understand that those core principles are what you want to adhere to. Freedom, liberty, equality, equanimity, all those things are good. But to your point, Janet, and you've nailed it, democracy does not sustain itself. It requires all of us. Virginia, for example, just went through this with this redistricting referendum, right? And although it passed, the courts now have put a stop on it. It will go to the Virginia Supreme Court.
Yep.
I've got mixed feelings about what they do with it. I think it's got a 50-50 shot of either being overturned and being sent back or not. But I think the point is that, the number of Virginians that participated in the voting, the turnout was lower than I hoped it would be. I was hoping it would be a huge turnout and that Virginians would really let their voice be heard. Whether it was pro or con, I didn't care as long as the people spoke. And they did. But I think that when you look at a vote that was, 2 to 3 points it passed by, I think folks thought it would pass by a bigger margin. And so freedom means we are working in a bipartisan way of fairness and of not just a zero-sum game of, well, I'm doing this because they did it over there, or I'm doing this and I'm going to be against it because it doesn't benefit my party.
Right.
And I think that shared freedom, that shared responsibility calls on all of us to understand that when we want to redefine, all we're saying is we live in 2026. And there are those among us who, Janet, are being very clear right now that they want to go backwards. They don't want diversity and inclusion. They don't want women to serve in the military at the highest levels. They don't want equal pay for equal work. I could go on and on and on, and that's going backwards. Why on God's earth would we go backwards after all the hard-fought civil rights gains that were fought for women and people of color in this country, why would we want to undo that and start over?
Recording stopped.
That's crazy.
Absolutely. Sophia, thank you so much. And I have a Generation Z person here in the studio. She is our producer, handling things right now, and she is so inspired by your words. She was telling me during the break, Naya, now you can put yourself on camera. She's being shy. There she is.
Hey there, young lady. That's wonderful. Make sure you get an audio book or an e-book, because the hardcover's a little pricey, but I'll make sure we get you some down at the studio. I'll have them send some.
Okay. Thank you so much. And it comes out, the 28th, right?
Yes. Big pub day. You'll see me all over your TV. You'll get tired of looking at me, but that's good. And but I'm excited.
Recording in progress.
Janet, that's a good thing. I like that.
Okay. Thank you so much. Sophia, I hope you have a good weekend.
Need a key fob? Don't go to the dealer. Keyless Entry Remote Inc. has you covered. We sell genuine